If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what was the creepiest, paranormal thing you saw in the middle of the day/night? My childhood home was massively haunted. A lot of the haunting happened during the day, but here's the one that panicked me the most. I was alone watching my brother. I was around 18, he was 2 or 3, barely talking yet. We were in his playroom, a really brightly lit area downstairs, playing with blocks or something, when he suddenly goes from giggling and running around to just dead frozen staring at the entryway into the room. I ask him what's up, and he just points to our staircase and says Icy Noise. He'd been pointing and saying that freaked out randomly for a while now, and I figured it was gonna be another time showing him nothing is there, but I finally take a good look at the stairs and there's something there. Our staircase was mostly surrounded by walls, so I hadn't noticed at first due to shadow, but I could see crouched on the step just below where the wall cut off this pitch black shape of a person. It was literally a slightly fuzzy silhouette of a person made of just pure black, clearly looking at us between the hand railing. It took a step further down toward us, still crouched holding the rails, before my brain processed that I was actually seeing it. I screamed, because what other response are you really gonna have to that, grabbed my brother, and hauled ass out of the house. We ended up sitting in the backyard playing with my sister's dog while I called my mom and waited for her to get home. Sightings of that thing only got worse before we moved out. When my brother was a bit older, he was able to explain he called it Icky Noise because whenever it showed up he could hear this really gross, scary gurgling whispering. I never heard it make noise, but I definitely saw it several times, and it got rid of my idea that daytime was automatically safe real fast. This was a few years ago now. It was early afternoon, probably around 2 p.m. on a Saturday. My dad and I were standing in the kitchen. I was at the counter, a sort of breakfast bar which is higher than the rest, making a sandwich. He was standing behind me and to the left, in the doorway near the fridge. We were having a discussion about something I can't remember, when he stops mid-sentence. At this moment I look up from my sandwich and directly to my right is what made him stop speaking, a floor-to-ceiling shadow in a roughly cylindrical shape about 2 feet wide. I immediately turn and face this thing as it swiftly and silently glides straight past me, passing in front of the kitchen window, which it totally obscured the light from, and straight through the wall. I looked at my dad completely speechless but managed to ask if he saw that. He just nodded in response. I walked past him and into the hallway and then went into my parents' room. This thing would have to go through there on its path. Nothing. We spent some time trying to figure out what could have caused a floor-to-ceiling shadow like that. We were entirely stumped, but we've both experienced the paranormal many times before. On an interesting note, this shadow would have passed directly into the master bathroom, having gone through the wall in the kitchen that it did. My dad has seen an apparition of his mother-in-law in the doorway of this bathroom before. He also claims that when he was very young he would see strange little men, sort of like gnomes, in his parents' house, and they were not always friendly. That house still gives me an uneasy feeling. Was an adolescent and went into the woods with a neighborhood friend to investigate the old house. It stood in the middle of an otherwise completely wooded area and was connected to the rest of us only by a poorly kept service road. When we got there, we discovered that the house also had what looked like a one-room school on the property. Through age-glazed windows, we could see the broken chalkboard and rotting desks that kids once used. The schoolhouse had a cellar that opened via large doors chained over. We tried pulling on the handles to see if we could somehow open them but gave up. After a while, we landed on just planning some general vandalism, but then it happened. Those damn cellar doors exploded open, throwing the chain aside, paused at the apex of their open, and slammed shut seemingly faster than they had opened. Yep, I shit myself. He and I took off running. Through the woods. Once we emerged in the neighborhood, trembling and scratched by seemingly every tree and bush we passed, we stood staring at each other and, alternately, the woods. Nothing happened afterwards, so we made our way to each of our homes and just agreed to not talk about it. 20 years later, we caught up via phone and I tried to ask, but before I could get it out, he said, "Yep, I remember. No, I don't ever think about it and I have no explanation. Let's not revisit." And so it stands, the most unexplainable thing I've ever seen. Working in the North Georgia mountains land surveying. As my boss and I are wandering through the woods doing what we do, both of us become very quiet, which is pretty normal for us. But everything around us fell silent as well. Birds no chirp. Bugs no hum from cicadas or crickets. No squirrels rumbling around. No sound. Which both of us knew is not good. We are looking at each other and we both hear whispers, but we can't tell what words are being said. Continue walking and clearly we both hear a loud stop. We both stop dead in our tracks and say nothing. While looking around we notice 4, Probably more that we didn't notice, Indian graves. We were about to walk on them. We packed up for the day, and as we loaded the truck the nature noises all came back. Nothing strange happened when we went to finish the project. When I was a kid, my family had a family reunion at a big ranch venue on the Guadalupe River, Texas. Looks and feels as old as the hills, but it was established in the late 70s, so it's not that much older than the house I grew up in. I must have been around maybe 8 at the time, but I vividly remember experiencing really weird shit the whole weekend. Started off on the first morning we were there. I kept hearing the sound of kids' footsteps and voices running around upstairs in the main lodge, but my brother and I were some of the only kids there, and the others were out at the river. I even went so far as to investigate, but when I didn't find anyone up there, I was so royally freaked out that I refused to go back up until bedtime when I was forced. Later that day, the rest of the family was down at the river, but I didn't feel like going. There was an old playground with a few slides, some of those shitty spring horse toys that are whiplash waiting to happen, and an old metal merry-go-round. I was sitting on that merry-go-round watching the river when I heard what sounded like small footsteps running in the grass behind me. I turned around to look, saw nobody there, and the footsteps were gone. Alright, that's creepy, but I decided to be brave and stick it out. Not even 2 minutes later, the footsteps start again, running directly at me. They sound quick and close together, like a child's stride. It changes from grass to mulch sounds, and then I feel the merry-go-round start to shake as if someone were running on it, accompanied by a clang 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 sound of small shoes on metal. Didn't even bother to turn around, just stood bolt upright and took off like a shot. Sprinted as hard as I could, but I felt something step on the back of my shoe and stop it with enough force that I ran clean out of it. Didn't stop, just kept running. Sprinted all the way down to the river in a teary panic and told my mom what had happened. She didn't believe me, and made me go back to pick up my shoe. Basically had to drag me the whole way, because I was absolutely panicked and didn't want to be anywhere near that playground. Made it through the rest of that day without encountering anything, even made it through the night. But when I was woken up in the morning for breakfast, my brother had already gone downstairs. I had been sleeping on the top bunk of a bunk bed, but when I started to move I heard small footsteps in the hallway again. I quickly went to scramble down the ladder, but the ladder started thunking and shaking like someone was climbing up toward me. I jumped clear off the side of the bed and sprinted down the stairs, but didn't even bother telling anyone that time because I knew they wouldn't believe me. Went back to that camp back in 2012 on a trip with a buddy of mine, and it's been massively updated and modernized by now. That ducking playground is still there though, and it still gave me the creeps. I am pretty sure that people who go camping a lot will agree with me that forest at night is a pretty creepy place. Lots of sounds you couldn't connect to any animal. I usually dismiss them as wind or weird echo, but about 5 years ago I went camping in southern Alps and I set my tent just inside the tree line. After about 2 days of being there and exploring the nature, hiking and doing a bit of caving, I started to feel like something was around me. Not like following me, but that something was all around. I thought I was just tired and dehydrated, but when the night fell on the third day and I was laying in my tent I started to hear branches breaking and leaves moving really unnaturally. It's quite common for branches to break under their own weight or because they were rotten, but when I woke up and checked the trees there were marks on them at about 15 foot high. Not just one tree but a lot of them. On the 5 trees around my tent there were also scratchings at the same height. I was pretty scared at that point because I have no idea if some local was playing a prank on me or there was something more sinister going on. I had a knife to defend myself, but I quickly packed nonetheless. Being a 5-foot woman that barely weighs 120 pounds, I wasn't going to take any chances. I checked the trees and floor for the last time and there were no footprints or any disturbed foliage. Which meant that what came on trees didn't touch the ground even once. After I started heading back to the valley I heard this noise, like a deer mixed with a man's voice. It was so creepy I legit started running downhill. I didn't look back once, and even though I am not religious I grasped my crucifix that grandma gave so hard my palm started to bleed. You have no idea how shitty and ducked up the whole situation was, and the worst thing of all, no one believed me. After asking the locals if there were people living up there or if there was ever anything shady going on, they ignored me and started to avoid eye contact. When I was about 13 I think, me and my 2 buddies were hanging out when we decided to take a walk in the trails through the woods near my house. We walked around for a little while when we decided to go off the actual trails and into the forest itself. Not that crazy, walk in any direction for about an hour and you hit a road, so not really concerned about going of the trail. After a couple of minutes, we found an abandoned shack. It looked almost like a garage. It was just sitting in the middle of the forest with no discernible path to it. We thought it was definitely weird. I had been walking and biking those trails my whole life, and had never seen or heard about it before, so we opened the door and went inside to take a look. Inside we found an old boat, with, oddly, a brand new engine on the back. Again, there is absolutely no trail or path leading to this place. Stranger than that, the place is literally half filled with junk. As in, there is like 2 to 3 feet of just random crap covering almost the entirety of the floor. Being dumb teenager, we were weirded out, but we still explored the place. It had a second level with more crap covering the floor. Eventually, after getting creeped out, we decided to leave. Things got weirder at this point. As I mentioned before, if you walk in any direction for about an hour, you will just hit a road. We didn't want to have to walk that plus however long it took to get back to my house, because we were lazy. Given that we had just kind of wandered through the woods for a bit, we couldn't remember which trail we needed to take to get back to my place. Luckily, we had walkie-talkies with us. We had mostly used them for calling each other names previously. All 3 of us grabbed one, pick a way to go and set off. I guess all of us happened to be dicking around with the channel selector at the same time, because no one got far before we all kind of stopped and looked at each other. On one of the channels was some woman absolutely sobbing. Great heaving sobs while muttering in between to catch her breath, but we couldn't make out what we were saying. As soon as we all heard it, we beelined back to each other to see if the other guys were hearing this shit. Sure enough, it was coming through all of the walkie-talkies. We tried for like 45 minutes to get the woman to respond to us. We kept asking if she was okay, and what was wrong, but she just kept crying. I think at one point there was even somebody else on another channel we talked to who could hear it on his walkie-talkie. Eventually, after about 30 minutes or so, the channel went silent. It took us a little while to get out of the trails, and we were creeped the hell out on the entire way out. Never heard any reports of anything happening in the area. No injured or missing people, nothing. My friend and I were 15 and we bought a doll at a yard sale because we were bored and it was 25 cents and we thought we could redress it / put makeup on it and have a punk baby doll for a laugh. Well, we take it home and put some makeup on it and dress it up. We set the doll on the couch with us and watch a movie. Over the course of the movie, the doll started to creep us out. Something made it seem like the doll's facial expression had changed. We figured it was the makeup we painted on the doll, but nevertheless we were creeped out and decided to put the doll in my room. I wrapped the doll in a sweater and put it in a drawer in my dresser because I didn't want to walk into my room later when I was alone and be scared. Well, later my friend and I decided to go hang out in my room, and the doll and the sweater I wrapped it in were on the floor. We were home alone and my friend and I didn't leave the living room after we put the doll away. The doll moved by itself. I cried and begged my friend to take the doll with her BC I was home alone and didn't want to be alone with the doll. She took it home and over the weekend it moved by itself twice at her house. She had put the doll in a trunk at the end of her bed and told no one about it. Monday at school we gave it to this girl in our English class who was dabbling with Satanism. She eventually moved to Oregon but mailed the doll back to us because it even creeped her out. We burned it and threw it in separate dumpsters across town. About 4 or 5 years ago, one of my good friend's family moved into a new house which was on a big plot of open land. He had acres of land, and the area was rumored to be an Indian burial ground. Of course, being 18, all of my friends didn't believe that type of stuff and there were no issues. Well, after about a month of living there, my friend started telling us about weird dreams he had. Whatever, he's crazy, we thought. So he invites us to stay the night, and about 4 of us go to party and sleep there so we didn't have to drive drunk. We all had the same exact dream that night we stayed that he described a week earlier. Well, we start to tell others at school, and this one girl wants to come during the day to check out the new place. We start telling her in broad daylight about the weird things going on that we experienced. Well, he has a glass lamp on the ceiling, and a glass table right below it. My friend who lived there joked and said if there are ghosts here, that glass light will fall through this table and shatter the glass one day, I know it. And the girl says I'd like to see that, and as soon as she finished her statement, the light falls out of the ceiling, hits the glass table, shatters both pieces of glass, and broken glass is everywhere. We were speechless. It was about 4 in the afternoon and hotter and sunnier than all hell. WTF. I have a coworker who claims she has the equivalent of a portal in her house where spirits travel. This woman is about as logical as they come, so it surprised me that she believed in stuff like that. Don't get me wrong, I'm a huge ghost show fanatic. She claims that sometimes they follow her to work. I thought nothing of it, it was a casual conversation. One day, I had brought my son to work. Him and I were the only people in the store. I was standing on the other side of this closed-off counter area, and to my right I saw a little boy, about my son's height, with blonde hair. I saw just a glimpse of the color of his clothes as he passed between one aisle and another. I yelled to him to ask what he was doing. When he responded, He was sitting on a stool on the other side of the closed counter saying he was still playing his video game. What was so weird was that, in order for him to have gotten to that aisle on my right, he would have had to come around to the left side of the counter and pass me. Same to get back to his spot. Considering the distance from one location to the other was pretty far apart, there's no way he could not have made the feat in mere seconds. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You just saw him, didn't you? He followed me to work today." She then went on to describe the kid in perfect detail, without any prior knowledge of what I'd noticed about him. My mom and I were house sitting for family friends. This house was a cabin in the woods type of house with huge windows on one side. My friend was there too. We were both 14 at the time, about 7 years ago. Next to the house, on the side with the giant windows, there was a stretch of heathland. I'm not sure if this is the right translation. It's like a dry sandy patch of land with bushes and heather flowers, and then just dark pine forests. I look out the window, as I was the only one facing it at the time, and I see something run by and disappear behind a tree. It looks like a small child with one of those Christmas elf hats on, only white. Their clothes, a blouse and pants, are also white. The hat was trailing behind them as they ran. I couldn't see many details, but it did look like just a happy child running. The tree it vanished behind was way too thin to properly hide a kid though. I jumped up and said I saw a child. It hid behind the tree. My mom, who's never a skeptic about anything, said, "Sit down, I have seen it too." She explained that earlier that week she'd also seen what she called a spirit, on the heathland too. Now here's the weird shit. We hadn't talked about what it looked like other than a child, so my friend suggested we'd both go to a different room and draw what we saw, and then we'd know if we saw the same thing. Comparing the drawings, we'd drawn the exact same thing. A child, long white elf hat with a thing on the end, white blouse, wide white trousers, happy face, running. We called the family friends whose house we were in, and the woman explained that she knows it, small with all white clothes on, and that it meant no harm. We haven't seen it since, but the tree it disappeared behind was a tree the couple had planted for their wedding. I think maybe it's a spirit of that forest, someone who died there or something, and who is now just chilling and enjoying the love this couple has for its forest. One summer afternoon when I was about 10, I was playing in my backyard with my younger brother and two of our friends. I don't remember which of us saw it first, but we all watched this large black creature walking down the street in front of the house. I grew up in an area where sporadic black bear sightings occurred, so I knew enough to stay where we were just in case, but I also knew that what I was seeing wasn't a bear. We lost sight of the creature as it passed by the house, but it never emerged on the other side of the house. Instead we saw what looked like a large man dressed all in black casually strolling down the street. I was more curious than scared at this point, so I ran to the front of my house to try and figure out what the hell was going on. I got there in time to see the man walking from the road into a neighbor's yard which bordered on a pretty big forest. My friends and I ran down the street to where whatever it was had left the road, but we were too scared to go into the forest after it. The trees were fairly dense, so I wasn't able to see anything from the road, but my brother swore that he saw red eyes looking back at us. We told our parents and we were promptly laughed at. I was really into the X-Files at the time, so my parents just chalked it up to my overactive imagination wanting to see something paranormal. For years it became a joke between everyone, "Hey, remember that time the kids saw a monster walking down their street?" I believed that I had exaggerated the whole event and just saw a big dog with its owner chasing it or something like that. Then I was given the book Weird Pennsylvania and came across Helltown. It's about a 15-minute drive from where I grew up, connected to the forest that we watched the creature walk into. The weirder thing is that the book was published in 2005 and the story says it happened about 12 years ago. That's the right time period for when we saw our creature. My family doesn't think it's much of a joke anymore. About 12 years ago, my older sister and I were going through a big Ouija board phase. We'd play with it almost every day, but one day in particular will forever stay in my memory. We had one spirit thing in particular that would almost always speak to us, who called herself Rachel, but on this day we got in contact with a spirit who claimed their name was Goddard, and who claimed to be Rachel's 3-year-old little brother. My sister and I both felt a little uneasy about this contact, but we were naive optimists, I guess, so we continued to talk to it, but as the conversation progressed, the responses we were getting began getting darker and darker. My sister and I couldn't take it anymore once he or it started to talk about our parents dying. We both felt terrified and worried about the things that were said, so to calm down we started to watch some TV. About 5 minutes after stopping, my sister suddenly felt extremely tired, which was weird because it was about 1 in the afternoon, and she was an energetic 14-year-old, so she fell asleep on the bed behind me while I continued to watch TV. She woke up about an hour later extremely weak, and with a very high fever, but the most frightening and unexplainable thing she woke up with was one small red, almost skeletal-looking handprint on her wrist that slowly faded away as the day went on. My poor sister was terrified, and to this day, she hates even thinking about it. I was around 11, maybe a year or two younger at the time this takes place. I live on a reservation and am a member of that tribe. I figured I'd explain that part beforehand. My aunt lives in this house that is located in the country, like her neighbor has a cow pasture. Her nearest neighbors are a couple miles away. Her house is located on top of a hill with no trees. Just tall grassland. One day my mom decides we should go visit her and my grandmother. We spend the day there and end up having supper. It was just a super chill day, honestly. In the evening, as the sun is just getting ready to set, my aunt, mom and grandmother decide it's really nice outside and they'll sit on the porch. I stay inside because adult talk. They're outside a good while when my aunt comes inside and calls her kids out. They were in their late teens, early 20s. Everyone runs out. I follow. There's drums being played. As in traditional powwow drums. There is no singing, just drums. It sounded like it was coming from over the next hill, which is a half-mile walk to the top of that hill and then a valley and a series of tall hills. It was faint but recognizable. She calls her nearest neighbor and asks if they're playing drums or having some sort of ceremony. They reply no. It doesn't make sense, as the rest of her neighbors are older farm families, meaning they are non-native. It's possible they may have listened to at the time powwow tapes or a CD, but loud enough that it carried over miles? Typically non-natives in this area are not very accepting of native culture. But who knows? The sound didn't stop. Eventually everyone said that's creepy and went inside. My mom and I left. My aunt said it continued. Eventually she just went to bed. She still lives there, but that has never happened again. Although one or two strange things have happened there. Nothing on par with that instance. I guess this wasn't in the middle of the day but early evening. Oh well. That's my creepy story. I was walking along a trail in the woods with my miniature poodle. We get to one bend in the trail and she refuses to proceed, hanging back until the leash pulled tight. She just stood there, perfectly still, staring at a point up ahead just to the left of the path. I tried to coax her but to no avail. I tried to pull her forward but she got very panicky and started to twist her head out of her collar. I walked back and picked her up, at least she let me do that. I slowly walked forward while carrying the dog. I could feel her trembling in my arms. As we got closer to the spot she started to growl softly, never taking her eyes off that one point. Her head stayed aligned to that spot as I walked past it, so I knew exactly where she was focusing, but there was nothing at all there that I could see. I wanted to experiment a bit, but I didn't want to further scare my already terrified dog, so I walked on by. She turned in my arms to still watch that spot. Once I got a dozen or paces past the spot she calmed down and I set her down again. She trotted ahead to the end of the leash and proceeded to walk normally for the rest of the hike, as if nothing strange had ever happened. Camping in the boundary waters between Canada and Minnesota. I had a dream in which my bro-in-law came to my camp. We walked around the lake chatting about things and then he told me I had to go home. My sister needed me. I told him I had another week of vacation and he said, "Sorry, you need to go home now." All morning I kept thinking of this with a weird feeling, and finally packed up camp and paddled and portaged my way out. I got in the car and drove several hours to their house in Duluth, all the while thinking they were going to think I had crazy. When I got there, the neighbor informed me Dick had died in his sleep the night before. My sister had gone to our mother's. When I got to my mother's house they were on the phone with park rangers trying to find a way to get a hold of me. When my sister asked why I came back early, the only thing I could say was that Dick told me to. I am not religious and have never believed in an afterlife. I have no rational explanation for this and it has always bothered me. When I was younger, maybe like 5. I went to bed and I woke up to the sound of something whispering and I thought nothing of it until I heard "Hey, PSST," and I looked up and saw a black dog with yellow eyes standing on 2 legs. I started screaming and crying and yelled for my parents, and when they came up the thing hid behind a chair in my room. I was so scared I slept with my parents for a week and never saw that thing again. I had multiple dreams about it though. It always had this power that it could make me freeze and not be able to move, and he would always do it in front of my parents and they never did anything. Really creepy shit. I don't generally lean towards paranormal things, but when I was a teenager, I went on a hike in south central PA by myself in the Appalachian Mountains. It was a day I was playing hooky, so there was nobody else there at the small trail, at least that I could see. You had to drive there was no foot traffic. I was young and had been talking/singing, horsing around the whole time, totally unconcerned. Yelling things off the top of the mountain, etc. On my way down from the mountaintop, I heard my dad's voice call my name and ask for help. I thought I was having a stroke, and stopped and almost started to follow, thinking WTF is my dad doing here, did he follow me or something? And then I came to my senses and told myself, my dad is sitting in his office like an hour or more away. I heard it 2 more times in the space of a minute or two, call me by name, and tell me to come here and help me. It sounded so insistent, like it was urgent, and it was without a doubt my father's voice. I have never ran so ducking fast. I used to do this hike in bare feet and I remember ducking my feet up hurrying down the mountain. I never went back and to this day don't know what the duck that was. I immediately drove to my dad's office and he was sitting at his desk working. I don't remember if I told him what I experienced at the time or not. Not exactly paranormal, but the only thing I got in the middle of the day, I saw a UFO. I was 9 or 10 at the time. The house I was living in at the time was somewhat rural, about 5 minutes outside of town, but off a side road. We were surrounded by woods and only had one neighbor. I was home from school, it was a Saturday, and it was a really nice day outside, so I decided I'd go sit on our porch swing for a bit and enjoy it. I wasn't out there for long, maybe 10 or 20 minutes, when I saw it. It was gray, vaguely metallic, and circular. It didn't spin as it moved like you see in the movies, like a frisbee, it just went in a straight line. It was silent. I'm not sure how big it was, I'm very bad at judging size and distance, but I can confidently say it was on the larger size of things going by how far above the trees it was and the fact that said trees did not move. I only saw it for about 2 seconds. It came from behind my house, towards town and the river. The piece of sky that I could see in between the porch awning and the tree line was very small. It came, and went. To add even more strangeness, my stepsister and I decided to go hiking out into the forest one day about the same time. We only lived in that house for about a year and a half. Eventually we found a narrow path bogged down with mud when the rest of the forest had gotten too dense for us to walk through. At the end of that path was a giant clearing, easily 30 yards across or more, circular, and surrounded on all sides, save for the one path we came through, by dense forest. I always thought it was very odd that the ground here was very firm and dry despite the muck we had to get through, and that the grass was very short. Like, almost not there short. Logically, from all the sun and rain, that grass should have been overgrown like everything else. All in all, that place was very weird. I was camping in the 80s on Bluff Mountain between the Blue Ridge Parkway and the Punchbowl Shelter. This area is part of the Appalachian Trail. Basically you can camp anywhere off the dirt roads or trails. We were camped about halfway up Bluff Mountain for a week. Second to last day, we decided to do the day hike up to the top of Bluff Mountain, taking our time to explore on the way up. When we got to the top, we saw the old fire tower foundations, did some exploring and found the Oddie Klein Powell Memorial. You can Google his name to read about him. Remember, this is the late 80s, no internet, so us stumbling around and finding this powerful memorial where a child had died 100 years before us was profound. We stayed for a bit reflecting on the story and talking about it, then hiked back down the mountain to our camp. That night at our camp, we slept outside our tents because the weather was beautiful and it was our last night. The 3 of us slept in our sleeping bags lined up next to the fire, a few feet in between each of us. We dozed off to sleep. Every night like clockwork at around 3 a.m., we could hear a train whistle way off in the distance. It was kind of cool because if you happen to be awake, those of you who have roughed it understand that sleeping in tents or sleeping bags isn't the most restful sleep. You knew that the sun would be up in a few hours and you had a sense for what time it was. I was stirring in my sleeping bag right after I heard the train whistle when I heard something coming. When you camp in places like this you can hear the slightest sounds at night because there is nothing but animal movement, bugs, etc. I reached over and smacked my buddy on the leg to alert him something was coming. Keep in mind it's pitch black in the forest in the middle of the night. Our fire was nothing but a few small embers, so the light it provided was minimal. I wake up my buddy as the noise is really loud and heading right at us. Noise stops and standing directly in front of us in our camp in the middle of the night were 2 men with shotguns and a lantern. They were dressed in overalls and wearing boots and hats. Shotguns were lowered, but still, they had shotguns on us in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night. I had the only weapon we brought with us in my hand in my sleeping bag, a CO2-powered pellet gun, which would have had little effect on 2 guys with shotguns. We brought it to keep animals away. All 3 of us were shitting bricks, scared out of our minds at this point, and it was like a standoff. Who's going to flinch first? They shined their lantern at us, we stared at them waiting for those guns to be raised, which was silently understood by us, that if that happens all hell's gonna break loose and probably not going to end well for us. Without a word spoken by us or them, they turned around and walked off. None of us spoke to each other until the noise of their movement was far away. We immediately got up off the ground, had a brief what the duck just happened conversation, and made the decision right there in the middle of the night to pack up and hike down to our car. We were off that mountain before sunrise. Years later I began researching the story behind the memorial and the child who had died on that mountain. I spoke with a few local historians and they had me speak to a professor down that way that was writing a book about the events of Oddie Klein Powell and his family's history in the area. It was he that told me that he thinks we had a direct encounter with the ghosts of that mountain, an idea that had never ever crossed my mind. I assumed they were moonshiners or poachers, who checked us out, saw we were young men and no threat so they moved on. This professor believes we had a ghost encounter, because in his research he had many similar stories from others in that area over the years. Apparently, as the story goes, search parties worked those mountains day and night looking for this kid who was missing back in 1887 or 88. The professor believes we had one of these encounters with the ghosts of the mountain still looking for the boy. I live in the woods in Florida, I'm 13 miles from the nearest anything, and that's a gas station. I'm 25 miles from the nearest town. My only neighbors for 2 miles are my parents, who live across the street from me. I'm a single mom, it's just me and my son out here, and our dogs. In my living room I have a giant gray sectional couch in the shape of an L. My son, who was 6 when this happened, likes to pull up the ottoman making the couch a giant bed area that he then piles all the blankets and pillows we own to make himself a camping nest and sleep out in the living room. Now that I've established some background info, the actual story. So I'm home from work early-ish one night and my son had built his nest on the couch and passed out early, like 8 p.m., so I had time to myself and a sleeping child. I decided to play some Skyrim uninterrupted for once. I'm playing my game and smoking my bowl, I've got my medical card, just having a great time when I hear my pit bull, Aries, bark. It's not a bunch of barking, just one, insistent, "Hey mom, you left me out and I want to come in," bark. Any pet owner should be nodding their head right now, we all know our pets' voices. I pause and look at the time, and I say out loud it's only 8:30, "You're fine, it's a beautiful night out anyway," and go back to my game. About half an hour later, he barks again, just that one "Hey mom, you left me out here" bark. It interrupts my concentration and I ignore the urge to get up and let him in. I continue playing, cause I don't get much time, working 50 hours a week and taking care of my kid and house when I'm not working. I'm mid a dungeon quest, and I'm concentrating hard, but about every 15 minutes I hear the one stupid bark, and I start to get really annoyed cause every time he does it, I get the literal urge to go let him in and it just tips me out of my train of thought and ruins my game immersion and I'm starting to get angry. If I wanted to let you in, I'd let you in, but you're 5-ing. Finally, he does it that one last time. Most moms know what I mean. I had had enough, so I toss down my controller, thinking how stupid this dog is, and as it hits the pile of covers next to me my kid is buried in. I hear a snore, a dog snore, and I move the blanket to see Aries, dead asleep next to my kid, not a care in his dumb doggy brain. Immediate fear and dread and heaviness like I've never felt washes over me. I can't describe it any better than an ancient fear. It felt old and terrifying and I literally heard a voice say in my head, "Don't move baby, don't get up, just keep playing like you don't know anything is wrong and it will go away. If you take one step towards that door, you're in trouble." I picked my controller back up, and kept playing. I heard the bark a few more times, but around 1145 the air in my house felt normal again, but I slept out on the couch cause I wasn't leaving my kid alone. So for me we were out chilling and having a few beers by the river. It was getting dark out so my friends and I wanted to head out before it was too dark to see the trail. On our way back we saw something. Something that looked similar to a human. Us being worried about the person and if they were okay went to shine the flashlight on the person except there was no face. I didn't see the face because my friend was closer and I was a few feet away. My friend said it looked like static when I asked him about it. The person bolted. Went from a laying down to a standing position faster than any human I've seen and ran off. It was tall too. Like over 7 feet tall if I had to guess. It was super dark out. The way it ran reminded me out of something that was a cross between robotic and the way that the bionic man ran. It ran away faster and quieter than a human. All the hair on my body stood on end, similar to the feeling that you would get when a thunderstorm is out. Except that there was almost no clouds out. All of my friends and I were freaked out and the hair on all of our arms was standing straight up. Never got such a strong feeling of terror and dread before. High school retreat. We had to sleep in some old house overnight that was previously owned by the landowner around the school. Tradition. It was a huge villa-type home. History of the house was it was owned by the rich guy who died, not in the home, and his wife donated the home to a cloister of nuns who converted it into a hospital for TB patients before converting it into a school. There are no records if anyone died or not or were buried on the grounds. Bear in mind this pre-med records. School staff had stated there were cold spots, whispering, and one woman working late saw a little girl reflected in a bathroom mirror out of the corner of her eye. She turned her back for 1 second only to hear something shatter, only to find the mirror had cracked. So of course, with these stories and about 40 plus girls, half who were less than happy to be there and the other half wanting to play Ghostbusters, no one was getting any sleep. My friends and I were in the midst of telling the others to keep it down, when there was a loud slam in a hallway that led to the bathroom. The room went cold and there was low, almost growling sound. My hair stood on end. Only the promise from the chaperones that any student found out of bed would be suspended for a day. Keep in mind the home was old and had much of the original furniture/fixtures, so they wanted people not to damage anything, prevented everyone from running out of the room. Everyone eventually fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. The next morning, the chaperones woke us up angrily asking why in the hell spent the night running back and forth in the hallway. Thing was, no one had gotten out of their sleeping bags. A friend of mine went to chaperone the next year and asked the ghosts some questions. Turns out, there is something there and I am afraid that she invited more in. When I was a senior in high school, a group of friends and I decided to celebrate the first day of October by doing the spookiest thing we could think of, using a Ouija board in a cemetery. We drove to the local cemetery, which sits right outside a small town of about 200 people, and found a nice spot to sit. We lit our candles, circled up, and began to communicate. We ended up contacting a spirit that claimed to be a little girl who had been killed by her father in a terrible accident. She said she was scared because she wasn't supposed to be talking to us, and that he was going to come after her. We all played along, but we had our doubts and thought someone in the group was probably just messing with us. Then things got weird. The little girl got scared. Like, really scared. She was giving her messages more frantically, and began talking in an almost hostile manner, saying she didn't like some of us. As this is going on, the wooden door of the shed that sat in the northern end of the cemetery suddenly opened and slammed shut. It wasn't a windy night at all, and we had been out there for nearly an hour at this point, and that hadn't happened at all prior to this. We asked her if she slammed the door, to which she replied yes. We didn't believe her, so we asked her to do it again. On cue, the door started opening and slamming rapidly. We all sat in horrified wonder watching this happen. Once we came to our senses, we said goodbye to the spirit and booked it out of the cemetery. That was the last time I used a Ouija board. Me and 3 buddies were hanging out late one night in a car on a dark street. You fill in the blank. I picked this particular street because my grandma lived on it and I was very familiar with the neighborhood. I knew the families that lived in most of the houses on that block, elderly people. When we pulled up, I surveyed the houses. Everyone's lights were off. We should have no trouble parking here for as long as we want. I had the driver park in front of my grandma's friend's house on the corner. My grandma's friend, a lot like my grandma, was an old woman who went to bed early. No family lived with her, no husband. Knew her most of my life. Anyway, my grandma's friend lived on a medium-sized lot and her house was up on a small hill. The hill was small, but it was pretty steep. A nightmare to mow. I'm sitting in the back behind the passenger seat. The car is still running at this point. We hadn't been there for more than 2 or 3 minutes. We had just begun our activities when I catch a glimpse of something moving in the passenger side mirror. I look out the window and what I saw scared the ducking shit out of me then, and it still scares me to this day, over 10 years later. I saw the silhouette of a person laying on their stomach, doing an army crawl, really ducking fast on the side of the hill, and it was headed right for us. This thing was moving quick. I'm telling you, I don't know how it's even possible on flat ground to crawl that fast, let alone on the side of a hill. It wasn't going down the hill, it was moving parallel along the side of it. Anyway, I screamed for the driver to go. 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 Now. Go. This thing had covered some serious ducking ground in a matter of seconds. It was within 5 or 6 feet of my door when we squeal-tired the duck out of there. As we got to the end of the street and turned onto a main road, the driver and my buddy next to me in the back were yelling. What the duck, man? Was it the cops? I couldn't speak, I was so badly shaken up. It had only been 10 or 15 seconds since we bolted down the street. I just wanted to get as far away from that road as possible. I couldn't process what I had seen. I didn't really want to. That's when it happened. I looked to my good friend, P, in the passenger's seat up front, and he had an absolutely terrified look on his face. I blurted out, "You saw it, too. Didn't you?" He didn't say anything. He just kept looking in the side mirror and then back to the dashboard. By this time my other 2 friends were pretty mad and emotions were starting to escalate. I told them I saw somebody or something crawling toward the car really fast. I asked P to back me up. All he did was nod, and then he asked us to drop him off at home. I wanted him to tell us what he saw, but he refused. All he would say is that he saw something. At the time that was good enough for me. I was just relieved I wasn't the only one who saw it and was freaked out by it. To this day I don't know who or what it was. I hated going to my grandma's house at night after that. And I never really wanted to be around her friend after that, either. The thought of a 60-something-year-old woman army crawling that fast at 1 a.m. scares me even more. Blue.